I found a will in my husband's files. Everything went to a woman I'd never met. Until my lawyer discovered Clause 17. I lived beside my husband for over 40 years, shared a bed, a dinner table, and every Thanksgiving season together. And yet, in one quiet afternoon, everything I believed about him crumbled. I stumbled across an old will tucked away in the drawer of his study, and my name wasn't on it. Everything, every last thing, was left to a woman I'd never even met. I just stood there, frozen, not angry, not crying, just cold, right down to my bones. But I didn't scream. I didn't smash anything. I quietly handed that will to a lawyer. And because of that, I discovered something that turned my whole world upside down. Clause number 17. Have you ever been betrayed so deeply that you start to question your own memories? My name is Geneva Lanford. I'm 76 years old. Most of my life, I've been a devoted wife, a patient mother, and the kind of grandmother the neighbors would say is gentle as an old winter quilt. But sometimes, it's people like me, the quiet ones, the ones who love too much, who are the easiest to betray. I'm not telling this story to point fingers. I'm telling it so that if there's anyone out there who's ever looked into a mirror and thought, maybe I don't matter to anyone anymore, you'll know this. You're not alone. The truth didn't come to me in whispers. It came on a piece of paper, small, thin, and cold as a winter night in Vermont. And if you'll stay with me, I'll tell you everything, every hidden layer, every reveal, and how an old woman like me, with silver hair and trembling hands, took herself back because of one clause that was buried for 12 years. All my life, I believed in Harold, in this house, in our marriage. But that afternoon, when I opened the forbidden drawer in his filing cabinet, I realized everything had been a carefully hidden lie. I still remember the light that day, dim and patchy, slipping through a dusty window pane. Harold's study was the one place in this house I'd never dared to enter, a sacred space, unspoken boundaries. He once told me, "No one comes in here but me, not even you, Geneva." And I obeyed for all those years. But now, the framed photos on the walls, the desk, so cold in its tidiness, and those quiet nights he never came to bed, they were all whispering to me, telling me it was time to open that door. Claire, my neighbor across the street, had come by that morning with an apple pie and a warm hug. "Hang in there, Geneva," she said, her eyes heavy with the kind of sorrow only widows know. "You're stronger than you think." I smiled weakly, but said nothing. No one could understand what it feels like to pull back the curtains alone after 42 years, to wipe the fog off the mirror where he once shaved, to lie on one side of the bed that now feels like ice. The funeral was simple and dignified, just the way Harold would have wanted. Our daughter Jenna flew in from Boston. She stood beside me holding my hand. But I saw it, the restless flicker in her eyes each time she glanced at her phone. She didn't cry. She and Harold were never close. He was too rigid. She needed a father who could listen. And Harold never learned how. After the funeral, the wooden house felt emptier than ever. I spent the first 2 days folding towels, rinsing cups, packing away my mourning clothes. Every object echoed a memory. I turned on the old cassette radio, the one he used to listen to AM legal news each morning, just to hear the soft crackle of static. The scent of drip coffee seeped from the kitchen. The one familiar thing left among so much change. Then I walked into Harold's study. For the first time, without knocking, I ran my fingers along the bookshelf, pulled out the small Bible he always carried to major court hearings. Something slipped out from its spine, a tiny silver key. I stared at it, unmoving, like it might speak, like it might explain every cold night, every locked door, every time he left the room without looking back. There was only one lock in that room, beneath the walnut filing cabinet Harold had custom made when we first moved to Asheville. That cabinet had always been a silent border between us, a no man's land we never acknowledged. Now I stood before it, key trembling in my hand. I knelt, slid the key in, a soft click, like a ghost letting out a breath. The drawer creaked open, deep, dark. Inside were neat stacks of documents, sealed envelopes, legal files, organized with a precision that felt almost inhuman. That was Harold, orderly, controlled, a maze of secrets. I began pulling files. Some dated back to 1987, 1993, 2005. Then I saw it, a pale yellow envelope with faint red edges, in slanted fountain pen ink. Last will, confidential. I sat down right there on the floor, my heart thudding out of rhythm, my hands trembling. I had never seen Harold's will. He always said, "It's all handled with Mr. Meyer." Never let me see, never let me in. I hesitated for a second, then tore the seal. Inside was a thick set of pages, official, notarized, typed in crisp legalese. The very first line made my blood run cold. I, Harold L. Bradshaw, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final and only will. I scanned the sections. Real estate, the Asheville home, the summer cabin in Boone, shares in the law firm, bank accounts, all listed in detail. But the name of the beneficiary wasn't me, wasn't Jenna, wasn't anyone I'd ever heard of. Sole beneficiary, Darlene Grant. I read it again and again. Darlene Grant. The name cut like a blade, foreign, ominous. Harold never once mentioned her. In 42 years, I'd never known him to have a colleague, a friend, or a relative by that name. No Grants in the family, no mention in any conversation ever, and not a single word about me. The woman who stood by him for nearly half a century, who nursed him through his first stroke, who trimmed his toenails for 30 years, who gave up her evening music class to care for him through an entire winter of bed rest. No thank you. No final words. Just Darlene Grant. I set the will down. The room tilted. It felt like I'd opened a box sealed shut for 4 decades, and now the secrets inside were suffocating me. A part of me wanted to rip the paper, throw it into the fireplace, but another part, the one that had quietly doubted every late return, every hidden phone, every sharp look when I asked too much, was rising now and whispering, "It's time to find out." I don't know how long I sat there. The ceiling light was still dim, like Harold's eyes in the photo I'd placed by the hearth. The world had gone quiet, except for the hallway clock, ticking relentlessly, reminding me that time moves forward, even when your heart just broke. I picked up the will again, read the words that cut like knives. Mahomo. I leave all my possessions, including real estate, accounts, investments, and personal items, to Ms. Darlene Grant, a woman I trust and admire. Admire? I was the one who spoon-fed him during rehab, who canceled vacations to stay by his side, who lived in the background so he could shine in courtrooms. And now, some stranger was the one he trusted and admired. My knees gave out. I collapsed onto the cold wooden floor. The will slipped from my hand, landing among scattered papers. A strangled sob escaped. Not a cry, but the sound of something breaking. In that stillness, I heard Harold again. His voice, his lectures about principles, the clink of spoon against teacup, The way he tapped the spine of a book when he finished reading. I heard the silences. The ones I used to believe were peaceful love. Now I knew better. They were hiding something much bigger than I ever imagined. I don't know when my hand reached for the phone, but it did. I dialed without thinking. "Claire," my voice rasped, torn from my throat. I need you to come over." 10 minutes later, she was there, in her striped sweater, holding a basket of apple pie and a jar of orange marmalade. "I've never seen you like this," she whispered, kneeling beside me. I said nothing, just handed her the papers. Claire skimmed through them, paused. "Darlene Grant?" she repeated. "Do you know who that is?" I shook my head. "But I will," I said. "I swear to you, I will find out. If this is the final gift Harold left me, then I'll unwrap it, all the way." I looked out the window. Night had fallen. The early winter wind rustled the pine trees. Their leaves whispered like voices from far away. Back then, I didn't know how much my life was about to change. All I knew was this: Darlene Grant took Harold's will, but she wouldn't take the truth. I couldn't sleep. For 3 nights straight, one name kept echoing in my mind: Darlene Grant. It wasn't just in the will. It was in every breath I took, in every quiet moment when I thought I'd finally found peace again. And strangest of all, I knew I'd seen her, at the funeral, standing off in the distance. No one familiar. She didn't say a word, but her eyes, they looked at me as if I was the one who had trespassed into her life. The house suddenly felt too big, too empty, too cold. The walls where our wedding photos used to hang, now just bare hooks in silent frames. I could hear the soft hiss of the fireplace, like Harold shifting in his sleep on a winter night. But it was just me now, with a cup of cold tea in hand, and a darkness creeping quietly into my chest. I sat in his old reading chair, the one he always used with the morning paper. Now it was just a lonely post, keeping vigil through sleepless nights. On the table, a stack of unopened letters, a half-flipped photo album, and the cassette player humming a Chopin piece Harold used to love. But none of it brought comfort anymore. I didn't cry. I just went quiet. Betrayal doesn't feel like pain. It feels like an invisible hand erasing you. Clean, precise, without a trace. I powered on Harold's old computer, for the first time since he died. Oddly, there was no password, as if, in death, the walls he built finally fell away. I opened his email. Each folder a world I never knew existed. Legal exchanges, work notes, none of it mattered. I searched for one word: Darlene. And there it was, a bank statement attached to an email from a private bank in Denver, dated 3 months ago. Recurring transfer, $3,000 per month to an account under the name D. Grant, with a note: personal arrangement, do not flag. My hands began to tremble, not because of the money, but the pattern. 3 months ago, 6 months, a year, the same over and over. For 4 years, every month, Harold had been sending money to this woman, quietly, faithfully, while I was counting every water bill, every plumber's receipt, every prescription he forgot to pick up. I printed the statements, then stood up slowly. My head spun. It felt like falling, not from a roof, but from the fragile illusion of a lifetime. Each line on the page was a needle through a heart already worn thin with hope. I called Jenna. I needed her voice, someone to witness the storm unraveling inside me. It rang twice. Then voicemail. I called again. She picked up. Rushed. Car doors slamming in the background. "Mom, is everything okay? I'm about to board a flight." I gripped the receiver. "Jenna, I found a bank account your father's been transferring money to, monthly, for 4 years. The name is Darlene Grant. Silence, then a sigh. Mom, please don't do this. Dad loved you. Maybe she was a former assistant or someone he helped. You're imagining things. No, she's in the will. Everything's left to her. Not a single word for me. And now I've found proof. He's been paying her every month for years. Another sharper sigh. Mom, I know you're hurting, but he's gone. Digging up the past won't make you feel better. Sometimes, forgiveness is the only way forward. I froze. Forgiveness? For who? For a stranger who took everything I thought was sacred? I don't know, Mom. And neither do you. Please, don't let ghosts drag you down. Click. I sat there, numb. Ghosts dragging me down. Yes. But how do I rise? When I'm drowning in a graveyard of things never spoken. I needed a starting point. And I thought of Claire, the only neighbor still patient enough to sit through the unraveling of a widowed woman's mind. I thought that was buried back in '82. I poured more hot water into the teapot, hands shaking like they were in a winter storm. The scent of jasmine couldn't calm the tangle inside me. All morning, I'd rifled through every folder Harold left behind. Bank checks, printed emails, looking for any mention of that name. Darlene Grant. Then I found it. A worn, crumpled page inside an old tax file. A brief note. Recurring transfer. D. Grant, 1982 to 2021. Next to it, a faded account number, ink blurred by time. 40 years of monthly payments, a financial commitment that spanned nearly our entire marriage. I felt dizzy. Every time Harold said he was handling bank paperwork, had he been sending money to another woman? I picked up the phone again, my finger hovering over Jenna's name. Even knowing she wouldn't want to hear it, I needed something to tether me to reality. Dad would never hide something like this from you, Mom. He loved you. You're being paranoid, Jenna snapped as usual. But I found proof. Transfers to Darlene Grant, going all the way back to 1982. You sound like a crazy old woman, you know that? I don't want to hear any more of this. Click. I let the phone fall into my lap. The betrayal surged again. Not just from Harold, but now from my own daughter. That afternoon, I went to Harold's bank. The branch was bright with harsh fluorescent lights and the scent of floor cleaner. The young manager, hair pinned tight, gave me a look of polite discomfort. I'm sorry, ma'am, but due to confidentiality policies, we can't disclose any information about a deceased client's account unless you're listed as an authorized party. I handed her the marriage certificate. I'm his wife. Yes, but your name isn't on the account file. I'm truly sorry. I walked out of the bank like a ghost with no name, wife of 42 years. And yet, in the end, I had no right to know where he sent his money. That night, Claire came over with a small box of butter cookies and 2 cups of tea. She was the only one who kept knocking after the funeral. Never asked too much, just sat with me, like an anchor in a stormy sea. Meyer still lives in the old district, right? She asked, slicing into the cookies. I looked up. Meyer? Harold's old lawyer. They used to share an office, didn't they? Wasn't he the one who drafted all Harold's legal stuff? I paused. Meyer, a name from a faraway time when Harold and I still argued about his late nights at the firm. He retired. All the better, Claire winked. Retired men are more likely to talk. Something in me stirred. Maybe I did need to sit down with Meyer. If anyone knew the truth about Darlene Grant, it had to be him. I met Meyer at the Copper Oak Cafe on a gray Tuesday morning. The wind was sharp, but I didn't feel the cold. I was burning from within, the questions gnawing at me since the night I found that drawer. The cafe was tucked beneath a wooden awning, stone walls, warm smells of cinnamon and roasted beans. We used to come here, Harold and I, after winter quartet concerts. Now I was here alone. Meyer was already seated near the window, light glinting off his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked older than I remembered, his hair ash white, his hands shaking slightly as he held his coffee, but his eyes were still sharp. When I sat down, he gave a silent nod, no smile. "You still drink the Ethiopia blend?" I asked, trying to smile. "Switch to Colombia," he said flatly. I didn't dance around it. I found the will. Everything was left to a woman named Darlene Grant. His eyes blinked once, then froze. A twitch in his jaw. He'd heard that name before. "I need you to tell me who she is." Meyer straightened, staring out the window. "I can't say much. You know that. Lawyers have obligations, even after death. I was his wife, 42 years of being kept in the dark. I don't need courtesy. I need the truth." He sighed. "I thought that was buried in 82. My heart pounded. Buried what? He shook his head, clasping his hands together. "All I can say is this. Harold once asked me to draft a special clause. Clause 17. Separate from the official will." Clause 17? Yes, but then he took the draft and never followed up. I never saw a final version. Never knew what he filed. But if that name is in the will, then I fear Clause 17 is the key. I sat in silence. Outside, a crow landed on the balcony, cawing sharply, like a warning. My coffee had gone cold. "What was Clause 17? I whispered. "A secret account? Property? A child?" Meyer didn't answer. He stood up. And before leaving, he slid a folded paper across the table, one handwritten line. Clause 17. Draft copy, 1982. Storage box 9A, Law Archive. I tucked the note into my coat pocket, heart thudding. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was a maze of memories. And I had just found the first open door. I had climbed those wooden stairs countless times over our 42 years together, but not once had I gone all the way up to the attic. The little trapdoor behind the hallway bookshelf had always stayed shut, like a sealed gate through time. Harold used to say, "Just old junk and dust. You wouldn't like it up there." But there I was now, on a gray, blustery afternoon, standing beneath it with the attic hook in hand, pulling the small circle of rope that dangled from the ceiling. The door creaked open. A musty cloud of long-sleeping air greeted me like a weary sigh. I cleared my throat, stepped carefully up the brittle wooden stairs, crouching slightly as the ceiling sloped lower. The attic was silent, save for the wind whispering through the gaps in the wood and the steady beat of my heart. I didn't know what I was searching for, but ever since I met with Meyer, I couldn't stop thinking about that name, Darlene Grant, and the cold finality of Clause 17. What had Harold hidden? And why was I, the woman who shared his life, the last to know? My eyes scanned every old box, every mildewed book. In one corner, I saw a battered leather suitcase, and beside it, a dark wooden chest so caked in dust I had to wipe it twice to read the faded letters carved into the lid. HLH. Harold Lawrence Hayes. I dropped to my knees. My hands trembled as I unlatched the chest. The hinges groaned open. Inside, Harold's old wool coat from 1984, faded photo albums, an old tape recorder, and a thick envelope tied with a red ribbon, placed with eerie precision at the bottom. I picked it up. My heart pounded. The front read only, "Personal. Only if I'm gone." I sat still for a long time, Then, mustering the last of my courage, I untied the ribbon. Inside were handwritten pages, soft blue ink, each word deliberate. I knew that handwriting. It was Harold's. The first line, Last Will and Testament of Harold L. Hayes, written July 2nd, 1997. Not typed. Not the version filed with the courts. This was his original in his own hand, and it began differently. I, Harold L. Hayes, being of sound mind and under no duress, write these lines to clearly express my wishes upon my passing. I gripped the paper tightly. My eyes welled up. Page by page, I saw familiar names. Jenna, our daughter, the city hospital fund where Harold volunteered. Then came something missing from the official version, a title, underlined boldly, Clause 17. I swallowed. Beneath it, a paragraph began, but was torn off. The beginning remained. In the event of conflicting versions, I hereby affirm that any prior will shall be considered null, and all rightful ownership shall be directed to my rightful she. It stopped at we. Wife? I whispered. Rightful wife? The attic tilted. If this was the real will, then the notarized one I saw was merely a shadow. And if he meant to say wife, why tear it? Something was wrong. I folded the will, tucked it into my coat. At the bottom of the chest, I found more old photos. Our wedding, Harold by his 1968 Ford, Harold holding baby Jenna. They asked me to believe he loved his family, but the will said otherwise. Beside the photos was a yellow envelope labeled, Forward to SG. I didn't know who SG was or what it meant, but I took it with me. That attic, the one Harold told me to avoid, now made sense, and I knew the journey had reached a point of no return. I ran my hand across the chest lid. The HLH engraving had faded, but it still bore the mark of a meticulous man. I opened the box. Inside, arranged with haunting order, old postcards, unopened letters, and a bundle of pale yellow pages tied with silver ribbon. I held my breath. The top page read, in Harold's slanted ink, Will, confidential. Not the typed version I'd seen. This was all him. Each line a glimpse into the mind of a man who planned for something. Or someone. By page 4, my eyes froze. Clause 17. Again, same paragraph, same torn end. Shall be directed to my rightful wife? Why was it ripped? I sat back, looked at the chest. Another letter, unopened, labeled, Forward to SG. SG? Who? I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I packed everything into a fabric bag and went to see Meyer. I didn't call ahead. He lived in a small flat in North Grove. White walls, wood door, an old bell. I rang. Oh, I figured you might come back. Just didn't expect it so soon, Meyer said. Come in. We sat at his small tea table. He poured water, eyes on the bag. When he saw the handwriting, his face changed. Dear God, that's Harold's handwriting, he whispered. I thought he destroyed all this. He didn't, I said. And I think you remember Clause 17. Meyer nodded. I drafted an early version, but Harold insisted on handwriting the final one. I asked why he wouldn't notarize it. He laughed. If it's clear enough, it'll survive. He was wrong, I said coldly. It didn't survive. At least, not intact. I pointed to the tear. Meyer leaned in, reading the last visible words. Wife? Will? I asked. Wife, Meyer said quietly. He told me once, if I ever get fooled, Letty will know. Clause 17 will speak for me. And now no one can hear it, I said. Not quite, Meyer whispered. Samantha, my old assistant. I used to have her back up our drafts. If it's not erased, we might have it. I held my breath. The office is shut down, but I know who has the key. That night, I didn't drive home. I drove past the old red brick building, Hayes and Meyer, Estate Law. The sign was peeling, but the second floor window still glowed faintly, like memory refusing to die. The next day, Meyer met me at a small cafe. He handed me a note. Walter Gelman, former building manager, lives at Red Oak Hill. He locked the place up. If anyone has a key, it's him. I nodded, stood to leave, but Meyer placed a hand on mine. Geneva, he said softly, I'm not helping you out of guilt. I'm helping because Harold owed you the truth. That night, I opened the attic window for the first time in 15 years. Cold air swept in, scented with mold and old paper. I laid out everything: our wedding photo, his letters, the one from Portland. Geneva, no matter what happens, you are always the last thought before I sleep. My hands shook. Then why wasn't I named in the end? Inside the chest, I noticed 2 small screws beneath the lid. I fetched a screwdriver, a hidden compartment. Inside, a sealed board stamped in red. Do not open, unless needed. I turned it over. One last handwritten line. Geneva, if you're reading this, I probably failed to make it right. But there is still someone who can help. Samantha knows where to find the rest. I collapsed, not out of grief, but from clarity. Harold had known all along, and instead of facing me, he left me groping through the dark. My name, erased from every legal page. I called Meyer. We have to find Samantha, I said. Now, before Clause 17 disappears forever. I looked out the attic window. Rain had begun to fall. In my hand, the torn line still read, To my rightful we. It was never about the money. I never lived for money. I lived for the family I thought I belonged to. But maybe I was wrong. Now, there is no turning back. If Clause 17 is the key, I will open it. For me. And for 42 nameless years. I never needed justice returned to me. I needed to know who took it away in the first place. For the longest time, I believed I didn't need revenge, didn't need anyone to pay for what they called justice. But that morning, sitting alone with the full, uncut copy of Harold's will for the first time, I realized something mattered more than fairness. I needed to know who took it from me to begin with. Samantha, Meyer's former assistant, brought me to that answer. She called around 8 a.m., her voice calm but urgent, like she held something fragile and burning. I found the original file, she said. Not a printout, unedited. It has metadata, the signature date, and digital authentication. You should see it. I arrived at Meyer's old office wearing a silver-gray wool set. The building stood alone on a main street that felt colder than usual. Leaves scattered across the stone steps. Samantha unlocked the back entrance with her own key. Inside the empty office, only a dusty old laptop and a printer remained. She showed me the screen. There it was. The line I'd never seen. The words Harold had never spoken. Clause 17. In the event of undisclosed marital bond, my rightful wife shall inherit the primary estate. I stared at it. Not with anger, with confusion. Undisclosed marital bond? Rightful wife? Wasn't that me? I couldn't speak. Samantha gave me space. She placed an envelope on the table. Harold forwarded this last year. The address said SG. I thought it was a person, but the delivery file listed it as Santa Gloria. Santa Gloria, a name that sounded like something out of a movie. I'd never been there. But some part of me knew. That's where I had to go. 3 hours later, I drove down sun-dappled highways, autumn leaves swirling across the windshield, October wind slipping through my coat like fingers reminding me that I wasn't young anymore. But I had never felt more awake. The Santa Gloria retirement home sat tucked beneath pine-covered hills, with white brick walls and ivory shutters. A nurse led me to room 217, where Ms. Darlene Grant resided. I didn't know what I expected. A threat? A lover? A fraud? But no. When the door opened, I saw a frail woman by the window. Cropped silver hair. Shaking hands holding a tepid cup of tea. She looked up as I entered. That first glance. I'll never forget it. No hatred, no jealousy, just a sorrow frozen in place. "I'm Letty Hayes," I said, "legal wife of Harold Hayes, and I believe you're the one he left everything to." Darlene Grant didn't flinch. She set her cup down, nodded slowly. "We're the last ones left," she said. Those words, from a woman I had never met, cracked me in two. Half of me wanted every truth. Half didn't want to hear a word. She handed me an old photo, a young woman beside Harold when he wore his hair long and denim shirts, 1972. They stood before a tiny chapel. Neither smiled, but Harold's hand rested on her belly. I trembled. Darlene looked at me like she had just handed over the last artifact of a forgotten life. We were engaged that year, but I got pregnant, and Harold refused to claim the child, said he wasn't ready. Then he vanished. I bit my lip. "Did you keep the baby?" Darlene shook her head. "No time. I lost it after 3 months. My mother never forgave me. Harold never came back." I don't know how long I sat in that small room, just that the light outside shifted from gold to silver, as if time itself hesitated to move forward. I never sued Harold, never demanded anything, never came looking. I disappeared, Darlene said, voice soft and distant like a dream. But he always knew where I was. Flowers came every April. Almond cake showed up each year, my favorite. Maybe that was his apology. Silent. I looked at her. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be half-loved, and what it meant to be the one loved in silence from afar. "Why now?" I asked, though I shouldn't have. "Why accept everything now?" Darlene laughed gently, a laugh that cracked like old wood. "I never wanted anything from him. Never knew about the will. Clause 17. Maybe it was for the child we lost. A way to apologize. A letter, 4 decades late." I lowered my head. The photo still in hand. The wedding dress in the image faded with dust, and inside me a void opened. Not because Harold loved someone else, but because he kept part of himself, a part of his past, and never let me see it. "Did he ever mention me?" I asked. Darlene shook her head. "No, but I knew he married you. I saw a magazine photo once. You were beside him. I just thought, at least one of us got chosen publicly." Chosen publicly. That phrase stayed with me all the way home. I drove through the tired autumn dusk, leaves sighing from the trees, my mind spiraling around the line. In the event of undisclosed marital bond, I reviewed the original will from Samantha again, this time reading every word. At the end, beneath Clause 17, a handwritten note in Harold's familiar slant. "If she ever finds this, tell her I'm sorry for what I never said. H." I stared at the note. My eyes stayed dry, but my heart was stone. Harold never apologized while alive. To Darlene, he left a fortune, not for her, but for a child who never came to be. Clause 17, to me now, was no longer betrayal. It was a confession, a grave for a chapter I never knew I wasn't part of. I called Meyer, You said the clause leaves assets to an undisclosed legal wife, right? Yes. It holds legal weight, especially if there's proof of an intended or abandoned marriage, he replied. So, if they were once engaged, once expecting a child, the clause could apply? Exactly. I was quiet. Meyer asked carefully, Letty, you're not planning to sue, are you? I smiled faintly. No, I won't fight for inheritance. I just wanted the truth. And now that truth had a face, a voice, a hand trembling over a peppermint tea. Its name was Darlene Grant. I stayed in my study late that night. Harold's younger photo beside me. The will untouched on my desk. Every piece laid out like the end of a chess game. But one question still haunted me. Why did Harold do it? Why choose that moment to sign, to write Clause 17? I looked at the old envelope, the one I once tossed aside. It still read, Forward to SG. I used to think it was a person. Now I knew. Santa Gloria. The place where memory was buried. The place I found Darlene. But was there more? I wasn't sure. Only that what I uncovered was just the first mask peeled away. Behind it might be truths never written in any will. I returned to Santa Gloria, not to see Darlene, for something else. One unanswered question. If Clause 17 was for a child Harold never acknowledged, where is that child now? I visited the care home early, the white gate slightly ajar, lavender on the breeze. An old woman played piano on the porch, and Darlene, knitting beneath a maple tree, thin as ever, eyes unflinching. She looked up. I knew you'd come back. I sat. No pretense. What about the baby? Darlene tightened her yarn. It's gone. 9 weeks in. I nearly died. Harold never came. But I don't blame him. I held my breath. He never forgot, she said. I think Clause 17 was for the child who never existed. A will for a mistake. A memory unspoken. I went silent. A man writing a will not for the living, but for guilt. For a ghost. Will you keep the inheritance? I asked. Not out of resentment, just to know. Darlene met my gaze. I have no intention of keeping a cent. I've lived long enough to know money doesn't mend. I'll reassign most of it to charity. I exhaled, not relief, but the return of something right. Why stay silent? Why not come forward from the start? She placed the yarn down. Because I didn't want to ruin how you saw him. You were the one he chose for a lifetime. I was just the beginning. Just the beginning. For the first time, I saw her not as a threat to my marriage, but a chapter of a book long shut. A story someone left unfinished. That evening, I visited Meyer's old firm again. Samantha waited, holding a portable drive. I found a recording, she said. A draft Harold made while preparing the will. You should hear it. I played the file. Harold's voice came through, tired but clear. If Letty finds this, you have every right to be angry. I was a coward, Letty. I left someone behind, then loved you like I hadn't. I wanted to make it right, but never found the strength. I left this part for Darlene, not out of love, out of regret. And you, if you hear this, know that I didn't divide my heart. I just let one piece go neglected for too long. I didn't cry, because some apologies, no matter how sincere, come too late. I met Meyer the next day. I want a new asset division drafted, I told him. Darlene refuses the bulk of the inheritance. I'll turn it into a scholarship fund under Harold's name. Not for his legacy, for children once forgotten, like that child. Meyer nodded. Harold would want that. I left as dusk fell. Rain began to patter. Wind shook the last stubborn leaves from the trees. I thought of Darlene, of Harold, of the unborn child, and of myself, a woman who thought she knew everything but had stood beside a one-way mirror for 40 years. I stepped out of the care home that day, unsure if I mourned Harold's betrayal or the family I never knew he once had. Memory doesn't betray anyone. Only people betray memory. I stood silently before the walnut wardrobe in the bedroom Harold and I had shared for 42 years. He chose that wardrobe when we moved into our first house, a wedding gift from my family. He once said, "This isn't just for clothes. It's where we'll keep the days of our marriage." Since his passing, I had never opened the left side, not out of superstition, just because I thought I already knew everything. What was there to reopen? But this morning, after hearing Harold's recorded confession from the hard drive, something made me reach for that wooden door. I searched from top to bottom, folded shirts, old ties, and in the farthest corner, a quiet ebony box. My hands shook as I pulled it out. The lock was rusted, but Harold was always careful, and I knew where he kept the key. The box opened with a click. Inside were faded photographs, a black and white scan, an ultrasound, a pair of unused baby socks, and a bundle of yellowed pages tied with silver ribbon. I recognized his handwriting instantly. The same firm, slightly slanted letters, like every stroke carried a hidden tremor. On the first page, "If you're reading this, it means I never had the chance to say it out loud." I sat on the cold wooden floor. The letters blurred, not from emotion, but because I had braced myself to hate him more, to resent him more. But those words didn't let me. Harold wrote about the summer of 1979. He had just become branch director, drunk on power and admiration. Darlene was a temporary secretary, filling in for someone on maternity leave. They stayed late after a quarterly review. They drank and crossed a line. "I knew it was a mistake from the first second," he wrote. "Darlene never asked for anything. But when she said she was pregnant, I did the worst thing. I said nothing." She didn't beg or cry. She disappeared. Harold told no one. Not me, not anyone. I was pregnant too then, expecting our daughter Jenna. "I carried that shame like a lead weight," he admitted. "I almost told you once, when you were planting lavender in the yard. But I couldn't." I gripped the letter. I saw myself in those years, a young, trusting wife, a new mother learning diapers and lullabies, believing her husband was the kindest man alive. Harold didn't deny that image, but he confessed that the more he loved me, the more cowardly he became. "I didn't want you to see me differently, so I buried the worst of me and let time cover it, foolishly thinking that was enough." I reached the last page. Clause 17 was my way of making amends. Not to erase you from my heart, but to leave something, or someone, in place of a child who never came. I know it won't ease your pain, but if you understand, forgive. Not for me, for your own peace. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. I held the letter tightly and, for the first time, saw Harold not as the stitched portrait husband I had imagined. He was clearer now, rougher, torn, but also remorseful. Someone who chose, in his own way, to leave one final act of decency. I left the box ajar on the floor. No reason to keep it locked anymore. That afternoon, I brought Harold's letter to the nursing home where Darlene stayed. No appointment. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing or just running from my own rage. On the drive, I imagined Darlene's younger face. Sharp, sad-lipped, eyes that knew too much. A nurse led me to the back garden. She sat between two rows of dahlias, staring into the distance. Not surprised to see me. No smile. just a small nod, like she'd known this moment would come. I didn't make small talk. I placed the envelope on the wooden table between us. "From Harold," I said. "Written for me. But I think you should read it." Darlene touched the envelope edge, hesitating before pulling out the wrinkled pages. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed sharp. She read slowly, lips pressed tight. No sobs, no explanation. I looked at my own hands, unwilling to interpret her expression. A breeze passed. The dahlias tilted westward. She folded the letter, slipped it back in the envelope, and slid it toward me. "He was right," she said, voice hoarse but steady. "I never asked. I never meant to break up your family." I nodded. "I know. I thought silence was the least painful path. Maybe I was wrong." I met her eyes. Maybe we all were. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. Something had lifted. We were both old, tired of truth buried too long. Forgiveness, if it came, wouldn't thunder down. It would drift like a white dahlia leaning into the evening breeze. I stood to leave, then remembered. I touched her hand gently. "Thank you for never trying to hurt me." She grasped my hand, dry, cold, but firm. "Some pain doesn't need to be doubled." I turned away, eyes blurred by something not quite tears. I knew I wouldn't see Darlene again, but that no longer mattered. That evening, Jenna sat in the living room, holding the reprinted letter. She didn't speak for 20 minutes, just read and reread. Her face shifted, darkened, softened. She chuckled at one part, sighed at another. Finally, she set it down, looked at me for a long time. "Mom, you live so kindly," she said, voice thick. "And Dad, at least he knew how to repent." I said nothing. "I used to think Dad could do no wrong," Jenna added. "Turns out, silence was his biggest mistake." "No," I shook my head. "The biggest mistake is believing silence could erase it." Jenna watched me a moment more. Then she came over, arms wrapping around my shoulders. For the first time since Harold's funeral, she hugged me, long, tight. I didn't need anyone to defend Harold or condemn him. We lived a full life, with cracks, yes, but also peace. And now, at least, I didn't have to protect an illusion. We were human, flawed. I had begun to forgive Harold, Darlene, and maybe even myself. I sat at Harold's old desk, where he once scribbled garden plans, invoices, reminders to water the roses. On the corner, 2 wills, 1 official copy, no clause 17, 1 original, with a handwritten addendum outlining financial responsibility to Darlene. In Harold's messy scrawl, "Only if the truth needs to be said." I sat a long time, hands on the original. My mind spun, not with rage, but emptiness. For 42 years, I thought I knew Harold from head to toe, but some parts, the fear, the guilt, the avoidance, I never saw. I stood, picked up a lighter, and stepped onto the back porch. The air was calm, evening quiet. I placed the will without clause 17 onto the fire pit Harold once used for dry branches, lit it. Flames curled the printed lines, turning paper to ash. Ash rose into the wind. Some drifted to the rose garden, where Harold and I planted each spring. I watched them go, not sad, not weeping, just certain. What needed keeping wasn't in notarized seals or official signatures. It was the truth. And I had found it. I folded the original with clause 17 into a small locked box, the same one Harold once used for our keepsakes. I didn't tell Jenna. I didn't plan to submit it. If Harold lacked the courage in life, I would guard this part of him in death, as protection and farewell. The next day, Meyer called. "If you'd like, I can file the original with the court," he offered. Adjust property rights per Clause 17. I know, I replied. But I don't need it. He paused. You forgive him? I'm not sure, I said. But I don't want revenge. Not for me. Not for Jenna. Not even for Harold. He exhaled like a man who understood some battles aren't about winning, just surviving. That night, Jenna sat beside me on the porch. She poured tea, arranged cookies like when she was in high school. She told me about work, friends, a neighbor's missing cat. I said little, just listened, and felt lighter, as if, for the first time in months, the house no longer held unspoken weight. I looked out at the garden. Ash had settled into the soil. Rosebuds had begun to sprout. I remembered a line Harold once said at his mother's funeral. Memory doesn't betray anyone. Only people betray memory. Back then, I thought it was comfort. Now, I knew it was confession. I smiled. Truly, the kind of smile that comes not from politeness, but peace. A smile that knows. The past, imperfect as it was, can be closed with forgiveness. I don't reclaim the inheritance. I reclaim the voice that was crossed out. I repeated that sentence in my head throughout the ride to court that morning. It was no longer a trial. It was the final moment I chose to speak the truth. Not because I wanted someone to be punished, but because I didn't want to leave this world someday carrying the silence that had lasted 42 years. Meyer sat next to me, holding an old file envelope, still legally valid. The original will, with signature, notary seal, and Clause 17. The only line that could have turned the entire case if I wanted. But I didn't want that. The judge was an elderly woman with gray hair and a soft voice, as if she understood that what was happening today was no longer about material disputes. It was something else, deeper. Meyer presented everything, carefully, clearly, leaving nothing out. I could see Darlene sitting across the aisle. She wore an ashen dress, hands clasped, eyes never lifting once. Jenna sat beside me, not touching her phone, not interrupting, just silent. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood gently. I didn't look at the judge. I didn't look at Meyer. I only looked into myself, reflected through the window glass behind the courtroom. I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to erase anything. I only want to affirm one thing. I am not the one who was cast aside. I was his wife, the one who walked with Harold Hayes for 42 years. I paused, took a breath. But I also know I'm not the only one he wronged. I turned to Darlene, and for the first time, our eyes met, without avoidance. I will withdraw from the inheritance list. I want nothing born of silence or deceit. I keep the original will only to preserve the truth, not for legal value. And from tomorrow on, I will no longer be connected to any portion of this file. I sat down. Darlene cried, silently. Just 2 streams of tears running down cheeks wrinkled by years of unspoken loss. The hearing ended. There was no ruling because nothing was left to judge. People began to leave, but Darlene stood and walked toward me. Please, wait a moment. Her voice was thin and trembling. I nodded. If you don't hate me, if truly you don't, I want to use what I received to establish a scholarship fund, a fund for children, the ones the world never waited for. I want to name it Thomas, the name I planned for my son. I couldn't speak for a few seconds. Then I nodded, lightly, very lightly, but enough for her to know. I wasn't angry. I had never been angry at her. We left the courthouse without goodbye. No one shook hands. But no one turned their backs either. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It only needs someone to stop and listen, and someone brave enough to speak a truth buried for half a lifetime. A few weeks later, Darlene and I met again in the small garden behind the nursing home. She had moved there the previous month, a small room with a window overlooking maple trees. No one explained why, but I knew she was tired, not from age, but from a loss that had never been named in 40 years. I brought a rare rose plant, its blooms creamy white with a blush of faded pink, like old paper. We had picked it together, naming it Claus, as a way to turn a clause that once hid the truth into a living memory. Darlene held the shovel. I held the root. The soil was dry, but the weather was mild. While working, I glimpsed her hands, old surgery scars, swollen joints from arthritis. But those hands still cradled the plant as if holding the child that never came. "Thank you," she said, rinsing her hands, drying them, and placing a bouquet on the windowsill. I smiled. "We are witnesses, not heirs." "Exactly," she whispered. "Witnesses to what men leave behind when they lack the courage to face it." That day, no one took pictures, no certificates, no need for validation. But the Claus rose still stood, like a living will, needing no notary, just two women holding onto it with their hearts. A few days later, I returned to the cemetery. This time, Jenna drove. She said nothing the entire way. When we arrived, she opened the trunk and took out a fresh bouquet prepared since early morning. I didn't ask. Harold was buried in the western plot, near old oak trees. I never liked that spot. But now I understood. He chose it not for the view, but for its quiet. He carried so many unsaid things, and perhaps he thought this place would give him one last chance to be heard. I opened my bag, took out a small envelope, pale yellow, handwritten by me. Inside was the last letter I wrote to Harold. "Harold, I know everything now. I'm no longer angry, nor do I need an apology. I just want you to know that silence protects no one. It only makes those who love us feel betrayed. I don't keep the money, don't keep the status, but I keep the most important thing, the truth. And from now on, I will live with it, without shame, without hiding. I forgive, not for you, but for myself, because I deserve to step out of the shadow, with my head held high." I folded the letter, tucked it into a small crack beside the gravestone. No tears, no farewells. Jenna stood behind me, silent. When I turned back, she asked, "Are you okay, Mom?" "Better than ever." We stood a while longer. A breeze blew, scattering leaves at our feet. I looked up. The sky was thin blue like glass. "What's the rose called, Mom?" Jenna asked as we got into the car. "Claus." She chuckled softly. "Fitting. I think it's a good way to end the story." I nodded. But deep down, I knew. No story truly ends if the storyteller is still alive. I will keep writing, not on legal forms or claims, but in every step, every story, every perspective I leave for those after me. As the car rolled away from the cemetery, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I didn't reclaim the house, the inheritance, or my name in any will. But I brought back something more precious. The truth, and honor, which I reclaimed with the very courage I thought I had lost long ago. There was a time when I believed that love meant silence, meant endurance, meant putting everyone else above myself. I called it sacrifice. I thought, as long as I loved enough, they would eventually understand and reciprocate. But then one day, I realized, love is not about turning yourself into a shadow. It's not about letting others decide your worth, or letting kindness become the reason you're overlooked. I lived too long in silence, thinking it was a virtue, but it turned out to be a slow erasure. And the most painful part was when people mistook that silence as agreement, as acceptance, even as uselessness. I don't need a will to prove I mattered. I don't need an inheritance to reclaim dignity. All I need is the right to tell my own story, to remind the world I lived, I loved, I lost, and I'm still standing here, whole. If you've ever been forgotten, ever been pushed aside, remember, silence is never an obligation, and self-respect is never something to ask permission for. Share this story to remind mothers, grandmothers, women like me. We don't need to be given a voice. We already have it. It's just time to use it.